everyone can hear me and see me?
Yes, we can, Charmaine.
Perfect, excellent. Yes. So as I said, I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners upon the land which we meet, on the Wurundjeri land. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also like to pay my respect to our ancestors who've made sacrifices for us to be able to be on these lands. My name is Charmaine Hanswy, and I am your host for today. And we have a stellar panel that we have, and we'll be discussing the intersection of leadership and heritage within public and corporate sector. So before we begin, I first want to hand over to the IPAA Victoria CEO, Nina, who will give us a short brief on IPAA Victoria, and then we can progress. Over to you, Nina.
Thank you, Charmaine, and welcome everybody. It's a real delight and honour to have you all on this webinar with us today. So I am Nina Cullen, I am CEO of IPAA Victoria. And first up, I too would like to pay an acknowledgement to the traditional owners and custodians of the lands that we are all meeting from today. For myself, that is the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present and their ongoing and long-standing connection to community, land, sea and culture. And I would also like to pay my respects to any elders or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be with us on this exciting webinar today. IPAA Victoria itself is a professional association for the public purpose sector, and we strive to provide opportunities for individuals right across that sector, so everybody who is connected to and wants to be part of providing a service and a benefit and work for purpose. We like to and we strive to support individuals to connect, empower and celebrate, and we do that through a whole range of mechanisms. We do it through thought leadership events, we do it through specific learning opportunities for different organisations, and importantly we do it through a whole range of networking groups. And this particular African Australian community of practice is a fantastic example of the sorts of networks that we strive to support and empower. So that does bring us here to today's session, and Charmaine has already given a lovely introduction. Our African Australian community practice has been in place now for over a year, and I am incredibly proud of the range of initiatives that that community practice has pulled together and continues to want to pull together to support the very important African Australian community that is here and many of you present today. So just briefly, my little reflection, I'm very well aware that today is Africa Day. It is a commemorative day to acknowledge that on May 25, 1963, 32 African countries signed the Charter of the Organisation of African Unity, which later evolved into the African Union. The Charter called for a greater unity among African countries. It supported the independence of African countries, and it promoted economic and political cooperation with a vision that all people on the continent would live freely and in prosperity. Therefore, on 25 May each year, people of African heritage celebrate Africa Day as a day of unity and shared identity. And from my perspective and our perspective at IPAA Victoria, it is a real privilege to help grow and support these very well-deserved celebrations. So this is the second year running that we have had the opportunity to support an Africa Day celebration through hosting a very important topic and group of panelists. And I really do want to, again, thank you all for coming together, panelists who you will hear from individually and collectively very soon, but also all of you who are participating and who have joined us to hear this great sharing of intel, sharing of insight and sharing of leadership. So on that note, I wish you all the best. I'm very excited to be able to participate and listen. And back to yourself, Charmaine. Thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about IPAA. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you very much, Nina, for your wonderful acknowledgements. And thank you again to IPAA Victoria for creating this space for us to be able to interact and share knowledge and experience about the African Australian experience, especially within the public sector. So for today's segment, we have a wonderful lineup. We have Bruce Gite, Tanya Williams, Fred Alale, and as well as Florence Maua. So in terms of, I can rat around, you know, what they do in their day jobs, but I think it actually has more value when the speakers actually tell you who they are and what they do within the public sector, because it's one thing seeing titles, it's another thing understanding what that actually means. So I will start off with Bruce Jite, who is actually based in South Australia. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks for having me on. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
No, I'm not muted. So it's great to be here. I'm actually at a conference, so I've just stepped out for this call, which is really good. I'm the CEO of the Committee for Adelaide. We are a fully member-funded organisation, and we advocate and help shape the future of South Australia. I also sit on a few boards. West Beach Trust board, which is a government board that owns a whole lot of land around West Beach in Adelaide, right up to Adelaide Airport. Stops at Adelaide Airport. We don't own Adelaide Airport. So I'm deputy chair of that. And I also sit on the board of the South Australian Multicultural Commission as well. So that's me. That's what I do day to day. And I look forward to contributing to this discussion today.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And it's so lovely to have you on this panel. We'll move on to Florence.
Hi, Charmaine. How are you doing? So I am Florence. I am a HR executive for Australia's largest telco and wireless provider. And as part of that role, I look after our HR practitioners. Outside of that and my interaction with the public sector, I sit on 2 Victorian entity boards, so that sit under the Victorian government, AIMS Australia and Queen Victoria Women's Trust. And I also sit on the board for African Music and Cultural Festival.
Thank you so much, Florence. And it's so lovely to have you at this panel. And we move on to Fred.
Oh, hi, Charmaine, and hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. So I'm currently a director in the Department of Justice, Director Policy, and the Enforcement Review Office. We work with industry to comply with current directions or pandemic orders to keep us all safe during this pandemic. From a community point of view, I'm very active in the African Australian community. I'm the chair of the African Music and Cultural Festival, the largest African festival in Australia, attracted over 40,000 people at Melbourne's Fed Square, and it's been going on for, this is the 9th year of the AMCF. I'm also the treasurer of Africa Day Australia Inc., which runs events around Africa Day, mostly 4 key events during the month of May. They do live forums, they do sports festivals, they do Africa's Got Talent competition, and finally an Africa Day Gala dinner, which is happening this Saturday at Melbourne Town Hall. So if there's anyone that's here that you want to be there, although it's a sold out event, we do have a couple of tickets that might be available. I might be able to get you that. Reach out to me and I can get you in. The Premier will be there, special guests of honor, as are other dignitaries and African Australian professionals and wider community at this event. I'm also active in other community initiatives like the Victorian Africa Community Action Plan Implementation Committee for the government. And yeah, I'll essentially just like to give back and help, especially African Australian youth, navigate their way through their careers and success in the corporate world or the government world, in the working world. That's my passion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred, for that. And I have to vouch for the Africa Day Gala. It is one of the marquee events to go to this year. So if tickets are limited, so please, soon after this, make sure you get a ticket. And last but certainly not least, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Charmaine. My name's Tanya Williams and I'm a British diplomat. I work for the UK government. I've been in Australia for about 4 years now. And have spent most of my career overseas, living in India and Ghana and now Australia. my heritage is actually Jamaican. I was born in the UK, and yeah, really, really pleased to have been invited to speak here today, and I guess to contribute to the diversity of the African diaspora here in Australia.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And it's so lovely to have you here. And you essentially, you're pretty much a representation of how diverse the Black community and the Black diaspora is. And you do have quite a few people, especially of Afro-Caribbean heritage, who are residing and call Australia home. So thank you very much for participating. So for today, I'll start with a few housekeeping. So when we're having our conversations, if you have a specific question that you want to ask the panelists as we go through the discussion today, there is a Q&A box right at the bottom. Please use that to ask any questions that you have for the panels, as well as essentially putting through the, if someone asks a question that's very similar to what you want to, please vote it up as well. So before we begin, I will start by going through to the chair of the IPAA Victoria African Australian Communities of Practice, Monica Forson, who's going to give us a few words before we commence the discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Charmaine. Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for this very special forum for Africa Day. Before I continue, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm meeting you on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people. I'm currently in Perth at the moment, and I'd just like to pay respect to the traditional custodians of the land in Western Australia, and pay my respects to any elders past, present and emerging who are in attendance at our session today. Their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship to the land, water and the seas continue today, and it's so great having our recent election and seeing the change in having Aboriginal Truth and Treaty and the Uluru Statement being actioned by this current government. So really important to acknowledge our First Nation communities in Australia. I'd also like to acknowledge the African elders in our community who are joining us today for their support and guidance for the IPAA committee, and also to myself personally. As I just said, today is a really special day and one that I look forward to marking each year. One, because it means my birthday is very close because I'm born on the 27th, but more importantly, it's the Africa Day is an opportunity to celebrate the diversity and the success of Africans and people of Afro descent across the world. We come together to highlight our cultural and economic potential that exists not only on the African continent, but in our diaspora communities, such as in Australia. As Nina stated, every year on the 25th of May, we come to celebrate the founding of the African Union. So it was only 59 years ago that our Pan-African leaders, such as Kwame Nkrumah, Leopold Senghor, Haile Selassie, and Neza from Egypt, came together to sign the Charter of the Organization of the African Unity, and that was signed in Addis Ababa, which is where the head office of the African Union is located now. The dream and intentions of our leaders were to unite African nations together to help them to resolve issues within the continent and to really stamp out colonization and apartheid. I think trying to bring it back to kind of why we're here today, those are our histories and our legacies, but it was only in 2008 that the African Union acknowledged the African diaspora as the 6th region, and we actually make up the largest region within the African diaspora or the African community, and our 6th region represents people of Afro descent across the Americas, the Caribbean, Europe, Asia, the Middle East and Australia. And we have a really important role to play, not only in our own diaspora communities, such as in Australia, but also for helping the economic and social development of the continent. And just in general, to foster great diversity. We are all different and unique, and so it's really important that these days like this, we're able to come together as a collective. We have been celebrating Africa Day in Melbourne since 2012 through community groups such as Africa Day Australia, and we really are focused on highlighting the positives within our community. Quite often, narratives discussing marginalisation and criminality spoken of in our media, but we know that's an experience, but it doesn't represent the entirety of our community. And so I am unashamedly pro Black excellence and pro, highlighting what we've got in our community, our success stories. And I won't bore you with everyone's name of people who I think are doing incredible things. But I think on a day such as this, we should be highlighting Peter Bol, who was in our Olympics, and he is a national hero. We have 18 players of African heritage playing AFL at a professional level. We have a number of A-League players in football, and I'm sure Bruce can go into that in more detail in a moment. In the arts sector, we have Sampa the Great, Genesis Owusu, who won a Grammy recently. We have a plethora of African Australian models such as Adu Achek. And the professional lens, we have African Australians in top 10 research positions across Australia. Some of our most highly skilled migrants to Australia are of African heritage. And I think Fred has a really great stat about Nigerian migrants to Australia. We have Nidal Ewan, who is now director of the Sir Zelman Cohen Centre at Victoria University, the first person of African heritage in that role, but also just due to her age doing incredible things. And even now we have African politicians such as Agor Chot in WA, the first MP of sub-Saharan African descent. And even today's session, we have so many people of African heritage at senior levels. I could go on and on and on, but you haven't come to listen to me, you've come to listen to our speakers. And so on one final point, I would just like to talk about the African Australian Community of Practice, which Nina mentioned during her speech. Essentially, we've been set up to support people of African heritage who are in professional sectors in the public purpose sector. And we're really focused on professional development and leadership capability. So we run bespoke mentoring programming, networking events, seminars, and events like today. And we have a mentoring program and a networking event coming up soon. So if you've signed up to our mailing list, you'll receive more information about it. And on a final note, I'd just like to thank our speakers today for coming and sharing your knowledge with us all. I'd like to thank our executive committee, in particular Sam and Josh, who have helped and worked really tirelessly behind the scenes to pull this event together. And also our special thanks to our IPAA staff for their support and coordination of this event, particularly Sane, who's helped us throughout the years. So I'll let us get on to the good stuff. I'm equally happy and really curious to hear what our speakers have to say today. So I'll pass the figurative mic back to Charmaine. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. And you forgot to mention yourself in one of those stellar people within the community who are doing amazing stuff. For all of you who don't know, Monica is actually one of the co-founders of African Australian Student Organization. Some of you may be familiar with it or even interacted with some of their services. So thank you for highlighting the amazing opportunities and amazing people who are within the African Australian community. So as you've heard from Monica, the African Australian community is growing, and we're also growing in terms of representation. We now have representation in so many domains of society and also within the corporate and public sector. In as much as there is that increased representation, it's still not enough. As we have seen historically, media has portrayed the African Australian community in a single narrative, which has diminished the hopes and dreams of a lot of young people because that's all the representation that they see. But we hope with initiatives like the African Australian Community of Practice and other organizations, we aim to highlight the positive narrative of our community, the diversity of our community. And our panel today show exactly that, how diverse our community actually is and how well established and the great contributions that we're making within society. So without further ado, we will start the conversations and delve into understanding the journeys of our panelists. As we know, Australia does have a difficulty in representing diversity. If anything, there is a bit of hope given the results of the recent elections that showed, a bit more progress, not as great as we would have wanted to, but it is taking some time for be it public organizations, public sector, as well as media, to really showcase how diverse Australia is. It is one of the most multicultural and diverse societies in the world, but you will never be able to see that if you look at our politicians, or even if you listen to media, or even print media as well. So we hope that we're going to elevate a lot more of our people, and also supporting people as they elevate within their different ranks. So without further ado, let's talk about all things Africa Day. I am super excited about Africa Day. I myself hail from Zimbabwe, and I've been in Australia for the last 11 years. I never had a connection to my culture as much as I did when I came here, because no one ever really prepared me for the transition from growing up in a predominantly Black community and then coming to a predominantly white community and becoming a minority. That required a significant shift within myself and how I view myself within society, as well as how other people view me. I started getting questions like, is your skin real? Or can I touch your hair? Or where do you come from? Things that I never was exposed to before. But again, these are some of the microaggressions and nuances you have to deal with when you are in Australia. So one thing that I take comfort and pride with is celebrating Africa Day. So to me, Africa Day means reconnecting back to my mother roots, and also celebrating the cultural diversity that is within Africa. I would like to know more about what Africa Day means to you, our panelists. I'll start off with Bruce. What does Africa Day mean to you?
Well, I think it's a fantastic way to, as Monica said, showcase what we are all doing, and we are doing a lot. And unfortunately, societal constructs and commercial outcomes that media agencies, etc., are beholden to, leads to, us not being highlighted as much as others, perhaps, unless we do something phenomenal, like bowl at the Olympic Games. But Africa Day is really nice, grassroots. It's Africans being proud of Africans, and I think there's a lot of work that we can do in that space, and I think that's one of the great things about the day.
Thank you so much for sharing, Bruce, and I absolutely agree. It is a wonderful grassroots opportunity for us to celebrate ourselves, because if we don't do it, no one else will. So
Exactly.
To be celebrating ourselves, indeed. Florence, what does Africa Day mean to you? And I know very much you're involved with the Africa Day Australia organization.
Yeah, for me, it's about a celebration of identity. So I think of my identity as an African, and I'm like you in that I didn't think twice about it while I was in a majority world where that was all I knew. But when you stand out in a minority space, sitting in the diaspora, I think the significance of being an African is front and center in your life. And it means, for me, the Africa Day piece is wearing that heritage with pride, and what that looks like in terms of the celebration of the big and the small, but just ensuring that we are being very clear about the importance of Africa in the symbolism of how we as African countries have that unity in signing, what was initially the OAU, but also about what Africa means on the world stage. So it's all about celebration for me.
Absolutely, and I attest to that unity that we have as the African continent in terms of showcasing to the world that you can be unified. And I also love the unity that we have within the Australian context of the African community, because I myself would have never met people from Burundi, Rwanda, or even from Chad, if I was back in Zimbabwe. So Australia has given us an opportunity to actually know about a lot more countries, meet other people as well from different countries, and celebrate each other. So thank you for sharing that. And Fred, I know you are a strong African advocate. So I'm pretty sure you have so many things to talk about when you talk about Africa Day.
Yes, but I'll keep it brief. For me, Africa Day is about cultural enlightenment. Enlightenment, not just for other non-Africans or people with non-African origin, but actually African Australians themselves, just like Charmaine mentioned, that she's learned a lot about other people. So before I moved to Australia, I didn't know anything about Africa Day. Yeah, my background is Nigerian. And then from Nigeria, I moved to the UK. That's where I did became an adult, did work and school, education and work before I moved to Australia. And again, even in the UK, I didn't hear much about Africa Day celebrations then. So I was very ignorant about Africa Day until I actually moved to Australia. In Nigeria is the way I would, the analogy I'll use is like a lot of people say people in the US, majority of the US population aren't really concerned about what's going on in the rest of the world. That's how Nigeria is when it comes to the rest of the things in Africa. Sometimes it's like it's very Nigeria-centric things. You don't hear much about what else is going on in other African countries. So having come into Australia now and I see this melting pot and I see different people from different communities, I was like, wow. So it actually has been a big cultural enlightenment for me to come to Australia and interact with many people of other African background, white African background, and other diaspora too. So it's been fantastic. So it's been a learning experience for me. That's what Africa Day is about. And that's what I was so passionate about. I learned so much. I was like, I need to learn more, that I get involved in Africa Day Australia and also started the African Music and Culture Festival, which leverages the skills and the talents and the culture of the wider African Australian community to bring it to the wider Australians. That's part of the things that drive me. So very, very close to my heart, a lesson I learned later on, and I'm glad I'm on that journey.
Thank you so much, Fred. And I can absolutely resonate with the concept of, not having that clear, be it pride in being African when you are back in Africa, because you're so focused on your little enclave and community, you don't really consider how amazing it is to actually be African. It's only when you leave the continent or you're in a different society, that's when you're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize so many things, because I myself am learning about the African history when I'm here in Australia. I wasn't taught the African history, much of the African history. So knowing, stories about Asantewa, and a lot of our heroines, it's only when I came to Australia that I learned about them, which is quite a shame as well. And is a reflection of, the colonial past and colonial education that still exists to this day. And so for you, Tanya, I know you come from the Windrush generation from the Jamaican community. So Africa Day might mean something slightly different to you, or maybe you might even resonate. So I'd love to learn more from you, especially coming from the UK and then coming to Australia. How has Africa Day impacted you or influenced you in any way?
So look, Charmaine, it's only been half an hour since we've been speaking and I'm already so inspired, and it's so interesting to hear about everyone's experience of sort of being born and growing up in a predominantly Black culture and then moving into predominantly white communities. My experience, I grew up in London, which is very culturally and ethnically diverse, and I grew up sort of identifying as Black British, there are lots of, and then you kind of then self-identify as I'm Jamaican British, Nigerian British, Ghanaian, but there was a lot of Blackness around me, and we were a community, a minority community, but it was quite strong and diverse. And as Fred says, I don't remember celebrating Africa Day. Every day was Africa Day for me growing up in South London. And it has been so interesting sort of moving overseas. And I think particularly in Australia, there is such a narrow definition of Blackness here there has been just an assumption that perhaps I'm a student. I think as well, or that I'm African American. The US has been really good at exporting Black culture, so much so that when people realize that I'm not a student, they then think maybe I'm an American with a funny accent. So for me, Africa Day is an opportunity to celebrate the diversity of the African diaspora and challenge this perception that we are one homogenous group, that we all think the same, that we all need and want the same things. You know, there are more than 50 countries on the continent. There are millions of people from the African diaspora across every continent in the world. You know, we are one of the most diverse communities in the world, and Africa Day is a great opportunity to showcase that.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And yes, we have adopted a lot of the Black culture in the US. And yes, that single narrative and narrow narrative that it's either you are a student or you are from the US, or often as well, sometimes it's just stating that, oh, maybe you're a refugee. But then the different ways that people have come to Australia is very diverse. You know, some come as students, some came on a humanitarian visa, some came for economic opportunity, and some even just came for leisure and decided to stay a little bit longer. So there's so many diverse stories and experiences about, you know, being Black in Africa, in Australia. Shameless plug here, I have a podcast called Can We Talk About It? And it addresses exactly this and showcasing the different narratives and nuances that are within the African Australian community. So I would actually want to learn more about how your heritage has actually influenced your trajectory to where you are now. I'll start with Florence. How has your heritage either influenced, inhibited, elevated you to where you are at the moment?
For me, Charmaine, it's been an interesting journey because I started my career in Zimbabwe. And so by virtue of that, back to the majority conversation, it was not necessarily something that I thought of. It was only after I stepped out of that space of being a majority, and full disclosure, ever since then, I have been a minority of some sort, whether it's from a gender perspective and from a cultural diversity perspective ever since. It's really shaped how I have faced into the work that I do. I will admit that when I first started that journey, there was an element of self-doubt in terms of myself and in terms of the skills that I was bringing to play, particularly because of people's perceptions about what it meant for me being educated in Africa. And so there was almost this perception that somehow the education I'd received was not on par with other people. And that coming out of that space to being in a space where I was comfortable and confident in my skills took some time. But once I got past that, the way that my heritage has shaped my career path is I feel like I've actually been instilled with a really good core base of skills that have enabled me to actually flourish in the work that I do. I think coming from and you know, Africa Day is a great space to talk about this. We come from a culture that is very accepting of other cultures. We come from a culture that forces you to collaborate. We come from a culture that's very communal. All of that, which lends itself very well to working in teams, lends itself very well to leadership roles. And so all of that I bring with me when I go into the workspace. So I wear it with pride now, but with the caveat that when I first started, there definitely was a space for me where I was wondering whether or not that was how I should present myself in a professional setting.
Oh, I absolutely resonate with that, Florence, especially the imposter syndrome that you then start experiencing because people doubt your capabilities or how you present yourself, or someone says, oh, you speak English so well. I'm like, what do you mean? You know, it's disheartening that, you know, speaking English is seen to be associated with intelligence, but the reality is I speak more than 2 languages. I think in more than 2 languages. So technically, I am actually more intelligent than someone who just speaks 1 language. So for you, Tanya, I know you touched on it already in terms of how you have navigated coming to Australia, people having the misconception that you're either a student or a US resident. How have you then navigated those conversations in trying to correct or rectify people thinking that, you know, you're not the British diplomat that you are?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I remember it was actually in India that I had one of my colleagues in the British High Commission say, oh, somebody was asking after you, I think. They were looking for the African-American girl from the British High Commission, and they'd had to explain that I'm pretty sure Tanya is not American. Look, I think that, you know, when I joined the public service in the mid-2000s, the UK was having a real conversation about diversity and the need to attract, you know, more diverse recruits. And at the time, I was really only looking for a job, and I wasn't really sure what it is they meant or they were trying to achieve with this. But hey, I wanted a job, and so I joined the public service. And it's now, after a career of over 15 years, I think that it's really important that your public service reflects the diversity of your population. And it sounds like a cliche, but we make so many important decisions, you know, whether it's about access to public services, or indeed in my position, you know, we're dealing with foreign policy and how the UK interacts with countries around the world. I work on trade and investment, and it's about supporting business and investment. And I think that it's so important that we have people from different backgrounds involved in these conversations so that we don't perpetuate the same biases that have existed throughout history over and over again. So I think that's where I think my ethnic diversity plays a role in my career, right? And it's not something, and I think we'll come into this a bit later, it's not something that I've always felt comfortable doing, but I think it's really important that we think about the world rather than the narrow perspective of our host country.
I absolutely agree. It's important for especially public positions, to reflect the society, because people in public positions are informing policy, informing law. And so if they don't reflect who the society is, that means they'll only be biased towards people who look like them or people who think like them. So diversity is important, absolutely critical in public roles. Now for you, Fred, you've navigated both the public and private sector. You've had interactions with, you know, with government as well as corporates. Tell me more about whether corporate, actually, I call it a concrete ceiling. We've heard the glass ceiling, which relates to women. We've heard the bamboo ceiling, which relates to the Asian community. I strongly believe we have a concrete ceiling within the Black community, predominantly, yeah, Black and First Nations, where essentially no matter how high you go, people will always assume that you're not capable enough. So I want to know more with your experience. Does that actually exist, or, you know, is it just a fluke? Are we just assuming that it's there simply because we can't see it, or are the spaces actually quite inclusive and culturally diverse?
Oh, that's a difficult one. But look, right up, I'll tell you, there are challenges. Okay, so there are challenges for you as say an African Australian or a minority of any disposition, really. There are, however, things that you yourself can do to prevail or reduce the impact of these challenges on yourselves, which I'll go into 5 things that I use as sort of my cornerstones. And those 5 things actually link to my heritage. So my heritage, as mentioned before, is Nigerian. And when you look at African Australians, we actually, I would say we've got 2-speed type background. We got backgrounds from people that come as highly skilled migrants into this country, very highly skilled migrants into this country. And then those are people like, from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Zimbabwe, from Kenya. And then you also have some other countries where they come from more of a refugee background and non-English speaking background. And they have unique challenges. So even those that come from a highly skilled migrant still have unique challenges in terms of getting an appropriate job that suits their skill sets, because they keep being told that you don't have Australian experience. So there are those challenges that I know they're still there. However, coming from a Nigerian background, and also my parents were professionals, for me and for any kids, any child of our family, it's never been a case of, are you going to go to university? The question has been, what are you going to study? And are you studying something worthy of what that thinks is worthy of you studying? That's been the conversation. And so there's been a different, so that's been my heritage. And but then for me, as I've grown and, transitioning from Nigeria to UK culture, to UK work, living, schooling, and then working in the UK before I then migrated here to Australia, there's been about 5 key things that I've found very crucial in sort of in reducing the impacts of these challenges that you have as a minority, as a Black immigrant or an African Australian in this community. One is having a goal and vision for yourself. You need to have a vision to say, or a goal to say, this is where I want to see myself in 2 years, 5 years time. In 10 years time, what you want to see for yourself. If you don't have a vision or a goal for yourself, you'll find that you'll be coasting and drifting, and you won't find yourself there. I've found that whenever I set myself target, these goals and say, this is where I want to go, somehow all your efforts and things you start to do is just start to align, and you start to find yourself moving towards that goal. So that's very important. So don't coast along. Have a vision and a goal for yourself and your life and where you want to go. Networks and relationships. That's the second point. Very, very crucial. Networks and relationships, very crucial. That's probably one of my most crucial assets. When I meet individuals, I don't just get their numbers and their emails. I will put a note next to it. Already now, this is my first time of meeting Tanya Williams. And I'm like, I'm going to reach out to Tanya. I want to talk to her a bit more and build that connection. Even though I don't have a mobile, I've got her email through correspondence that panels have. I've saved her and I put a note. The other thing is you put a note. I put notes against everyone I meet. And I put where I've met her and, just some things about her on it. So even if I forget her name for any reason, I think about the situation in which I met her, I put it in my phone and I'll find her name. And so that's also how you build relationships, crucial relationships, and you follow up on this, and you don't know where those things will lead. I'm where I am today, even in this role that I've got as a director role, through a relationship I had, through community work I did at AMCF in Victoria Police. There was a commander there that I was dealing with. They were the first to sponsor AMCF in that first year, and I built a relationship with them. In subsequent years, even her team, her department decided, AMCF is too successful. We'll rather fund other things. And, even though she said no, I didn't say, I don't like you anymore. No, we still kept in touch. I still met her and so on. And then she got promoted to other big senior positions and so on. It's then when I was a senior manager in my role, and I sent her a message to say, hey, looking for the next challenge. I feel I'm ready for this. And she said to me, actually, there's a potential position coming up. I'll let you know. Interview for the position and got that. Connections, that's just what I'm saying about relationship and network and building those relationships. They're crucial. Everywhere you are, they're important to help you get ahead and help you reduce the impacts of those barriers that you have in place. So don't play around with your networks and your relationship, build on them. Grabbing opportunities is the third thing. Grab every opportunity that you're given. Andrew Crisp, who is the Commissioner for Emergency Management, also said, we asked him how have you got to your position? And he said, look, I've been offered certain opportunities to maybe go and work in this department, etc. And whilst I thought, maybe not my cup of tea, but I will still go for it. And by doing that, he learned something new and he built different relationships and networks there that helped him along the way. That stuck in my mind. And that's how I take every opportunity. When opportunities come my way, I will grab them and make the most of it. So making opportunities, you make your own luck. That's it, by using those opportunities, okay? And the fourth thing, tenacity. You need to be very determined. Because you fail once or something is not successful, don't get dejected and, think, it's not everything. Pull yourself up, stand up again, give it a go, keep going. Tenacity is very important. And finally, I would say excellence in what you do. What is worth doing at all is worth doing well. Because we're under the microscope, Florence mentioned that when she started and people say your background, etc. By doing that, you almost have to work twice as hard as normal to almost prove yourself, to almost stand out because of all the deficits you're starting from to start with. So whatever you do at all, do it well. Excellence in what you do. When I took my first role, when I moved to the UK, and before university, I was doing a part-time job. I said, I'm going to do a job to earn some money and get some UK experience. When I applied for some roles, nobody was interested. I didn't have UK experience at that time. But then I got this job as a forecourt attendant at the petrol station, cleaning pumps. I cleaned that pump so well, I got an award from Shell as best customer service attendant and so on in there. And then I was also promoted. I got to then be trusted as a cashier with money in the till and so on in that role. So it was a small menial job, but I did it very well and got some things that I could even use for jobs later on. The same thing when I got to university. I knew that I'm going to be competing with people when I graduate with my background and so on in there. So made sure that when I was in university, I was active in extracurricular things. So I was the rep for my course. I was the rep for the faculty in business school. And then I did well academically too, got some prizes for audit prize. And also finally I graduated with the most outstanding student in school and also first class honors in accounting and finance. So again, it's about forward looking and saying, how do I differentiate myself when I go out there in a crowded market and with the disadvantages I might be facing? So thinking more actively about it, excellence in what you do. So those are some of the ways in which I've navigated and helped me get to where I am. And all those things I did in the jobs I had later on. I had a portfolio of my Shell award from Shell when they say best customer service person and all the prizes. I used that to get my first job and that put me aside and almost, then companies then were happy to, take me because of all those track record I'd built for myself. So that's how I've navigated that, Charmaine, some of those things.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you for sharing some of your insights. And as I said, we actually are recording this, so you will be able to listen back to all the conversations that we had if you've missed anything, because those are really good gems, Fred. Thank you very much. And I also acknowledge Ugo's comment of noting that twice as hard to get half the recognition. This is why diversity is important, so that you don't have to fight to prove that you're good at what you do. That's the biggest challenge that we have at the moment, especially within the corporate space. And, unfortunately, I acknowledge that sometimes I have to bear the brunt of working twice as hard so that the next person that comes through the door doesn't have that, same challenge and issues. Because I know, because of how I've conducted myself and excelled within my role, when someone who looks like me, similar like me, they have a reference point to sort of say, oh, okay, so this is, I've worked with Charmaine before. I know she's of African heritage, and this is how amazing she was and everything. This is something that I have acknowledged myself. Again, it's a personal choice that I made, that I will be the martyr and do the work in order for other people to have, the next generation to have less of a hassle and for them to be more authentic. That's the sad reality of the society in Australia. We are a minority at the moment. The community is growing, but because people, out of ignorance and so many other concepts, they don't have a reference point to sort of identifying, oh, I know someone, the only reference that they have is, the Black African-American experience or what they see on the TV, but then they don't realize that we're actually very diverse. And so me meeting someone and someone having an experience with me, I'm acknowledging that they're also having an experience about an African Australian person, because that's probably the first Black person or first person of African heritage that they've met.
I mean, I wonder if I can sort of chip in there. I'm really, really interested in this concrete ceiling argument. And I agree with everything that Fred has said, right? As an individual, it exists and we've got to navigate it and find ways to push past. But I think we've also got to look that ceiling in the face and not pretend that it doesn't exist. You know, there is, you know, enormous literature out there that demonstrates the benefits of diversity to the workforce, to society. And look, I've been working in the public sector long enough to know that actually you can create evidence to support any argument that you want to make. So, you know, but it's true, the evidence is there, right? And you know, it is a fact, it is a reality that structural racism exists, unconscious bias exists, anti-Black racism exists. So let's not pretend it's not there and have to work around it. Let's call it what it is, and let's not entertain fantasies that, you know, we live in a post-racial society and Australia is a multicultural melting pot, you know, and let's not get bogged down in debates about whether racism exists or not, or is there a ceiling or is there not. Let's start from the baseline is the ceiling's there. What are we going to do about it? I think, you know, we've got to work together as a community, you know, to call these things out, and with allies as well. Look, my experience has been if you're good at your job, nobody really cares what you look like. You've mentioned it, Fred and Charmaine, right? It's, as long as you deliver, you know, then if you've got 2 heads and 3 legs, people will say, no, Charmaine, she's amazing, and they'll give you opportunities. What we need to focus on is, what does it take to be good at your job? And do we expect more from Charmaine because she's from Zimbabwe than we do of Jack from Melbourne Uni, right? And those are the conversations that as leaders in organizations, we need to ask ourselves and we need to challenge ourselves about. I think for young people as well, I'm actually really inspired by young people like yourself and like Monica, because we didn't have this vocabulary when we were growing up. I'm guessing Fred and I might be of the same vintage, and we didn't have words like microaggressions and unconscious bias, and we had to sort of, we felt these things, but the only racism that was visible was like the hateful kind of. And so I think you know, let's not let this depress us. Let's call it what it is. Let's acknowledge what it's there, and let's work together to resolve these issues. And then everything that Fred has said is right. Build your networks. Take the hard jobs. You know, when you start a role, don't be afraid to put your hand up for promotion. Take the big project. And if they say no, find out why, get the feedback and act on the feedback. And if you do all of that and they still say no, they don't deserve you. Move on and find another place that will recognize your talents. That's how I think we're gonna tackle that concrete ceiling.
Spot on, Tanya. Absolutely agree with that. And yes, it's very important for us to call it out, because if you don't acknowledge it, then how is it going to be fixed? So acknowledgement is so important. I'll bring Bruce to the fold now, because you've had both, you know, experience in football as well as experience in the corporate. Now, how have been the challenges, you know, in those different aspects? Because I know one narrative that is very common, especially within the African Australian community, is, oh, we're great at sports, and you were in that field, and then now you've transitioned into corporate. How has that transition worked, and what are some of the challenges that you faced in those two worlds?
Look, I can't agree more with what Fred said, especially around network and having to work twice as hard. I can't disagree with anything that Tanya and everyone else has said. Hit so many nails on the head. I'll just sit there like, yep, that's true. Yeah, that's true. But it's just the cards you're sort of dealt because of the society that we live in, as disappointing as that may be. But I've had a very privileged pathway in this the sense that, yes, had to work hard and all the rest of it. But if you're good at sport in Australia, generally, your colour doesn't come into it. And funnily enough, I just coincidentally, I was with Adam Goods last weekend for a period. So I'm not saying that if you're good at sport, you won't confront racism and all the rest, but it opens so many doors. If you're good at sport in a sport-obsessed country, it opens a lot of doors. So it's a bit similar to what Fred said about, you've got the highly skilled migrants who come, and then you've got the refugees who come. Both African, two very different experiences. Doesn't mean the highly skilled ones won't confront racism, but they've probably got the dignity of having a job, their kids have gone to good schools, whereas the refugees, they're confronting the racism, but they might not have a job yet, they might have trouble settling in, they can't pay for the fees for even soccer, for example, right? So there is levels to this stuff. And I was able to transition from playing football. Yes, I went to uni and did all that basic stuff, but I was able to transition smoothly because the network was so strong. And why was the network so strong? Because everyone loves sport. Big corporate sponsor, very wealthy business people buy the corporate boxes or the corporate suites. They all want to meet the players. Their kids want to sign jerseys. Like, the amount of connections you can get through sport, and I played overseas, and I met ambassadors for Australia and Department of Foreign Affairs, and so the network's important. But what I find for me is that the more successful you are, I can tell that people are just waiting for you. Fly too close to the sun, people are just waiting for you to get burned, and they'll abandon you very quickly. So I haven't had the same challenges as those who don't have a profile, who don't have a strong network, etc. Yep, ticked all those boxes. Okay, got all these opportunities. But what I find is when you're doing better than the establishment, they're waiting for the chink in. It can't be that good. There's got to be something wrong. And as soon as there is, they'd pounce on it. So I sense that. I sense that. Not that it's happened, but I sense that you know, it's inherently built in. How can they be better than? And we can't knock them because they are better, but no one's that good. You wait. It's that tall poppy syndrome. Do you know what I mean? And no one's immune to it, especially in South Australia, especially in Adelaide. People love to bag someone who's failed at something, you know, but that shouldn't stop anyone from having a crack, having a go. What Tanya said about taking the big project. Take the big project on. What do you have to lose? Do you know what I mean? But I see that as one of the challenges.
Thank you so much for sharing, Bruce. And so from what I'm gathering with the conversation that we're having so far, seems like networks is like a really big thing, as well as being strategic with the opportunities that you take up as well. And I absolutely acknowledge, you know, the importance of having like those networks. And as the community is growing, well, now everyone in this forum, we now know Florence, we now know Bruce, we now know Tanya, we now know Fred. So you can essentially add them to your networks. And so that's how it all starts, by just networking with people around you and empowering each other as well. We are so much greater in numbers, and we have the resources, the tools and resources to equip each other so that we can excel and thrive in life. And so take these small opportunities, the forums that you attend, people that you connect with, even at an event that you go through, speak with people, share your experiences, you know, networks, that's how the world exists. That's how I've identified the world exists, you know, in this environment. We're actually getting a flood of questions in the Q&A box, so I love that. Please send through all the questions in the Q&A, and then we'll answer them as we continue forward. I'm mindful that Bruce will have to leave soon, so I'll actually start through with the Q&A at first, and I'll start with you, Bruce, because there's a question directly for you, and then we can then, let you go. So the question is, do you find that longing for people to fail when they're doing so well applies to both Black and other ethnicities and non-Black people? So basically, does it apply to everyone?
Yep, I think it does. But like I said, there's levels to this stuff. So the negativity that comes out from a white person, it's multi-layered. The negativity that follows a white person in a white collar, high profile job is less than the negativity which follows a white person in probably a blue collar job. And the negativity that follows an Asian that's failed versus a Muslim that's failed versus a Black person that failed. It's like, what's the best way to put it? Not that there's a rank, but it's class. Class exists. And it's more prevalent in the UK. You've got the high class and the middle class and lower class. It's less so in Australia, but it's still there. We talk about a classless society. Australia's a classless society. We give everyone a go, but it still exists.
That's so true. I mean, the whole concept of everyone having a fair go. Have to say, better than other societies, in the world, if I think of the UK context or the US context. Yes, in Australia, there actually are opportunities because you can bootstrap yourself all the way to the top. However, those nuances still very much exist in a structural, societal way. I will actually move on to Florence to get your feedback in terms of, some of the challenges that you've had facing with cultural diversity. How have you navigated that space, and how can people thrive regardless of some of these structural societal challenges that we face as a community?
Yeah, I think just listening into the conversation so far, and I completely agree with where everyone's coming from. I'm going to come with a completely different lens, which is the fact that I work in HR. And so by virtue of that, I tend to see from a work perspective, things which other people may not necessarily see in terms of people trying to advance in their careers and the challenges that come with it. I think the two things that I would say to this, which I would prompt people on, are, yes, it's great to have the network. And I noticed someone put in the chat there, but you get to a certain level and people don't necessarily then give you a chance when you're going up the ladder. You get the network, but you also get the sponsors, right? And the sponsors are the people that are in the room when you are not in the room, who make the decisions about you. So if I take the example that Fred gave around the role that he just got and being supported into a role, when it comes to the performance conversation, when it comes to the promotion conversation, when it comes to the salary increase conversation, Fred is not going to be in that room with the people who are making those decisions. If Fred has done his job, and we're talking about the fact that, yes, you do, and I think there's an assumption here, right, that you are actually doing your job, and I'll come to that later. But if he's doing his job, he will have the sponsor in the room who says, you know what, Fred's a great guy. You know what, Fred deserves the 2% over this other person. You know what, Fred didn't do a great job on that particular project, but I can vouch for him. And I think that's where we sometimes fall apart, in that we do not necessarily have those people in the room who are vouching for us when we are not in a position to vouch for ourselves. And so I would just say to the people on the call, who do you think is sitting in that room vouching for you? And if you can't think of a single person, then I think you've got some work to do. So that's the one aspect. The second aspect, which I said I think we need to address, is there's an underlying assumption here that the person actually can do their job. And I will say, sitting from my perspective and having, for example, I'll use a very simple example. I have lots of conversations with people where they tell me that they cannot get a job. They've been applying, they've put in 150 applications, they cannot get a job. It must be because, it must be because they're Black. And yes, I completely agree with Tanya that there are lots of studies that have shown biases to names, etc. However, on the flip side, I've seen some people's CVs and I wouldn't give you a job based on how you had written it out. So I think there's an onus on us to actually ensure that we are putting our best foot forward, because that underlying assumption that we're all fantastic, it's a bell curve. And I think we also need to have those very raw and honest conversations with ourselves. If you are at the top of that bell curve and you're doing a fantastic job, then yes, go for it. But you need to have people around you who can give you that feedback, and people around you who'll say to you, you know what, maybe you're not as great as you think you are. Or you know what, this is one where you should go for it. It is actually, some bias, etc. And I think some of that, as well as us as a community creating those spaces, that's where your network comes in. That's where your colleagues, your friends, your peers come in to help you calibrate, so that you know the spaces where you are pursuing, because hand on heart, you are the best candidate. Hand on heart, you're the one who should be getting the role, versus the ones where you probably need to do a bit more work before you can step into that space. And so I think for me, in terms of my career, I've tried to build that for myself in terms of the sponsors who are there in the room when I'm not in the room, who I know will be championing my cause for me. And I've also tried to surround myself with the people who will tell me, Florence, that's not you. Or Florence, you need to go for that, when I'm doubting myself and thinking maybe it's, maybe I'm not ready for it. And they're sitting there saying, no, that's for you, go for it.
I'm feeling a little bit dragged with that response. But yes, I do have to agree. Sometimes we are in our own way when it comes to some of the opportunities and challenges that we face. Sometimes we ourselves are biased against our own beliefs, and we don't take the opportunity simply because we feel like, because the structure is X, therefore I can't do it, so I'm not going to do it. And so it is important for us to also acknowledge that uncomfortable conversation, that sometimes we are in our own way. And so speaking of networking, that's a very basic skill that we all can adopt, and someone that can, start right now. But I'm also mindful, and I'll go through to you, Bruce, because I know you have to go soon, but I'm thinking of the young person who's just finished high school, has got zero networks. How do they even begin the conversation of a sponsor or building a network or talking to someone? Where can they begin?
Can I just start by saying Florence hits the nail on the head. The amount of people that are just like, I've applied for 100 jobs. It's like, you've got to take some responsibility too. Take some responsibility, be better. Because as racist or biased as people may be, everyone wants to be successful. If you can help someone who's got an unconscious bias be successful, they're still going to use you. They're still going to hire you. If you can make them look good, they're still going to hire you, right? So, Florence, I resonate a lot with what you've said. And Charmaine, what was your question again? Sorry, I just had a mental blank. Yes. Oh, someone who just finished school or uni.
Yes,
how do they build their network?
A young person. Yeah. How can they start that networking journey?
You know what helps with networks? Sport, community clubs. It doesn't have to be sport. It doesn't have to be soccer. It doesn't have to be footy. You might play chess. Get involved in something. Get involved in something where you have the opportunity to meet people, right? And it doesn't have to be in a professional setting. It could be in a social setting. But you've got to build that net. And you know what? Someone will know someone who is more senior than a graduate. Someone will have a job where they're reporting to someone. If one of your direct reports invites you to something, go along. Because there'll be other people who are direct reports. There'll be maybe your direct reports boss will be there, who will also have friends, right? LinkedIn is a fantastic way to do it. And I know it's a bit tricky because you don't want to be adding people sort of cold. It's not cold calling, obviously, but you know, I've got no idea who this person is, but I've seen them. I'm just going to add them on LinkedIn. But take the time, write a bit of a spiel. I'm trying to build my network. I've just finished uni. People will give you that's what's good about Australia. Because people will be like, you know what do I have to lose? Might build my network, might meet someone I don't know. So there's mutual benefits there that I think could be leveraged. That's how I do it. If you didn't know anyone, you've got to put yourself out there. And you know what? Some people are introverted, so it might be daunting to them, right? But there's always a solution.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for
Can I just add to that, if that's okay, Charmaine?
Yes.
Bruce, nail on the head there around what else do you do outside your work? It's important. What more is there to you? Some people are academically very, very good, but if you don't do anything else outside of that, you're really wasting, you're not taking the opportunities available to you. That's the thing there. So what else are you going to do? So what do you do outside? What do you volunteer? Do you get involved in various community initiatives? And also even just going out, work drinks, and meeting some new people through there. And that's how you build your networks when you're rising through the ladders. The other thing is also be mindful about other influential people in your organization and your interactions with them. So I'm a director. When I'm I've got an ED that's responsible for me, but their peers, I know them and I take some interest in them. And if they're saying something or they're doing something, I'm taking a note. So when I see them, I can replay that back to them and they know that, oh, you heard me, and so on in there. And you start to build those relationships with them. When one of my EDs lost a close family person, I sent her a personal message, sorry to hear that, this and that. And she replied back to me, it was a difficult time. Build that relationship because she will now become, as Florence said, one of those key supporters in the room when you're not there. That's how you're building some of those relationships, just sharing some practical ones, how you build those sponsors. And
just to round that out, it's not about doing something to get something in return. It's about just being a good human being. Because everything you just said, Fred, is what good human beings do. Be a good human. People like good humans. They might not even want to like you, but they can't help but like you. I can't not like this person. But there's some strategy behind that as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those strategies. And I think it is important for us to, look at networking as a basic opportunity and skill for us to be able to start building, those sponsors that we need, as well as, the opportunities that will actually come our way. So before we continue on with the conversation, I do want to say thank you to Bruce. Unfortunately, he has to go because he's on a conference, but I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with us. If you have more questions for Bruce, please put them in the questions. We'll send them through to him so that he can respond. Final words, Bruce?
No, just thanks for having me on. And like you said, any questions, just flick them through, and I'm happy, even if you send me an email later, Charmaine, questions, I'll respond. So thanks for having me on. Fantastic dialogue. And I'm assuming most of you are based in Melbourne. So I'm there this weekend for the grand final with Channel 10. I might hit you guys up next few times I'm over there to see you guys in person.
Thank you, Bruce, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
See you later. See you guys.
I'm absolutely enjoying the conversation and the buzz that's happening at the moment. We still have more time, so we are going to get to all the questions. The next question that has actually come through from the audience is, in what ways do we envisage those who have been able to make impressive progress in their respective career fields to be able to pave the way for young people coming after them. I'm thinking of you, Tanya, as you talked about, acknowledging that there is that structural racism that's there and structural issues that are there. How then can us in the leadership realm, we are seen to have made it and, be in those senior leader positions. How can we then influence the system or the structures so that the younger people that come through don't have to fight so hard? All my life we had to fight.
Is that a Kendrick Lamar reference? Is that? Look, I think we've talked a little bit about this already, right? But I feel like for some young people there isn't as well a trodden path as for others. And I didn't know that. So I grew up very working class in Britain. I grew up in social housing. I was the first person in my family to go to university, and just assumed that as a graduate, I would be on a par with other graduates. And then you quickly realize that actually, no, there's a university and then there's a university. And I think those of us that have had different journeys, and we've all had our own different unique journeys, it's important for us to share our experiences. I think I'm really interested in Florence's reflections earlier about the imposter syndrome that she felt, and also her comments about sponsorship. And it's actually not that easy. Sponsorship also involves being able to prove yourself. So there's also a bit of a cycle there in terms of being able to demonstrate that you're good enough in your job for somebody to want to sponsor you. And that's why I made the point earlier about, what is your value to your network, as well as what can your network do for you? And that's what I meant about volunteering for projects. You've also got to build relationships with people so that they can support you in your projects. I think sometimes when I speak to young people, particularly young women, they have this perception that people are out to get them, that they've joined an organization and everybody is expecting them to fail, and they just want to get everything right, but they don't want to ask for help. And I think it's really important to make your starting point, I'm here because I'm good enough and people want me to win, right? And then how can I recruit people to help me win? How can I, build a relationship with somebody so that I can get an opportunity to work on a project? How can I do that project really well so that that person, if they are a decision maker, can sponsor me? We have this model that we use, the PI model, that sort of talks about how your performance in your job, I think 1% is actually doing the job itself, but a huge chunk also has to go on your impact and your exposure. So it's not just doing your job well, it's making sure that the right people know what you're doing. And so I think there's a real role for us as leaders to share all of the things that we've experienced and learned on our journey with young people, and to look at how we can sort of tweak things to make it easier for young people now that we're here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it's always a challenge to try and break out of that imposter syndrome, and then being able to advocate for yourself. For me, it took a long time to be in a position where I can actually advocate for myself, because again, I have to admit my cultural background sort of stops me from, not necessarily stops me, but essentially it's not encouraged for me to, talk about my achievements or talk about what I'm good at and what I'm great at. And sometimes that can be really difficult to then, be advocating for yourself when you are in these public segments and trying to showcase that you actually are really good at what you do and you excel, and to articulation of that impact that you have within your organization. I will open up the question to, I believe we have Olatunde who has a question. Is Olatunde online?
Yep. Olatunde's hand's up.
Yes.
I think I can't get off mute.
Okay, I might get you, Olatunde, to type in the question because unfortunately we can't hear you at the moment. And I'm also mindful of timing. So I will actually start with the final thoughts from all our speakers. I'll start with you, Fred. You know, what are some of the, the final impacts, conversations or knowledge that you can have to the young people so that they can achieve and excel in the leadership space?
Yeah, so look, I'll just reiterate what I've just said before around have a goal and vision for yourself, networks and relationships. There's a common thread, what Florence said, what Tanya said, and also earlier on what we heard from Bruce. Grab any opportunities that come your way. You know, so like Tanya said earlier on, if there are promotion opportunities or job opportunities that come along, you know, put yourself out there. And also, even if you fail, get the feedback and act on those feedback on those things. And that's important. Tenacity, being tenacious in what you're doing. And finally, be excellent in what you do. If you're not good at what you're doing, people can't sponsor you, people can't recommend you, and you make it difficult for others to help you succeed. So whatever you do at all, what is worth doing at all is worth doing well. And I've just learned some amazing things from these amazing speakers. Florence, thank you so much. I'm also going to, for me, what you said around who's advocating for you in the room when you're not there has also made me reflect myself. And there are some things I'll do differently myself. So through this discussion, and Tanya, thank you so much for your insights too. Lots of the things you've said that a lot of our youths will take away from there, and also just calling it out to say, yeah, there are challenges in there. There are barriers. There is a ceiling out there, and facing it up front, but also, you know, there are things we can do to excel and break through those barriers. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred, and really appreciate those insights and feedback. Florence, any final thoughts?
Yeah, for me, I think the first thing that I would say, which is what I wish someone had said to me at the start, was, you know, be authentic and be you. You're uniquely you, so know your strengths, use your strengths, and then find your space. Not every space is going to be the space for you, but find the space where you will thrive. And then find the relationships, the networks, the sponsors, the peers, the friends who help you thrive in that space. And I think if you have that, you can't go wrong. Be kind to yourself. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Florence. And yes, I would definitely be more authentic and be kind to myself as well. And Tanya, any final thoughts?
And what more is there to say? Already great advice. I think just, you know, be brave and back yourself. You know, life is hard, right? And you will face people who, for whatever reason, have a particular bias against you, and just remember that that's their problem. You know, that's you can't let that hold you back. And at the same time, yeah, just be bold, venture boldly, I think would be my advice.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And yes, you're so right. So many great insights that have been shared today. And I am eternally grateful for the panel as well as the conversations that we've had. You would have noticed that we focused a lot about what you can do, because the reality is that's the only thing you can control in life, you. You won't be able, you can influence systems, you can influence, you know, certain aspects of society, and there are certain aspects that may be of concern, but the important thing is focusing on you, because it all begins with you. When you are well, when you have a better view of yourself, you have a better view of the world as well. So I hope that you've been able to have so many great insights. I'd like to thank IPAA Victoria for creating this space. I hope we continue to have more of these spaces, and hopefully virtually as well in the future. Thank you to the IPAA Victoria African Australian Community of Practice team for creating this event and advocating for African Australians within the public sector. We need more people like you in all sectors so that we are well represented, and we can also advocate and further some of the great initiatives and professionals that are within the space. So thank you very much. And for final thoughts, and thank you to everyone who has been able to be on this journey with us for the last hour and a half. I know there's so much to discuss, so many questions. Please feel free to share those questions. Please join IPAA Victoria so that you can get updated with a lot of the initiatives that are coming through as well. And for final thoughts, I'll hand it over to Nina.
Thank you so much, Charmaine, and thank you all speakers. I heard so much through that hour and a half, and I think the conversation could have continued for much longer. So I can't thank you enough for what you all personally shared as a community. In response to some of your comments just then, Charmaine, IPAA Victoria would love to continue to host these sorts of events and to support this network and all of you to continue to have conversations and share learnings and share insights and tips. What I heard very early on and throughout was the beautiful diversity that exists within the African community and the heritage and cultural backgrounds that have shaped every single individual that spoke, and also the questions that you put forward. And that richness needs to be respected as diverse, but also it does allow you to bond together as a community that will continue to grow and be strong. And from my perspective at IPAA Victoria, we support that and want to continue to support that. I heard some fantastic tips, in particular from Fred, who had all sorts of great ideas. I really loved how Tanya called out the glass ceiling and the recognition that racism is still an issue in various pockets. And that is always hurtful to hear, to be frank, but to call it out is really strong. So I respect that you have done that, Tanya, and all of you. But also I heard the strength and suggestions that you bring as individuals and what you have led through and continue to lead through, as I think we are moving into a more progressive society here in Australia. And one day I do look forward to us all rejoicing in the changes that have occurred. But what I heard was a great range of intellectual insights from you. And also you're very quite harsh on yourselves in terms of the standards that you set for yourselves. So a little pat on the back, and always, yes, do continue to be kind. I think each and every one of you has achieved amazing things for the community and for yourselves. So again, thank you, speakers. Thank you, African Australian Community of Practice, to have brought this group of people together. And thanks to all the attendees. It's been very insightful. And I really want to continue to support this network in having these sorts of events and others. So thank you. Thanks again, everybody, for attending. I think my team does tell me I always have to put in a plug for our survey at the end. So I think in the chat session, there may have been an electronic insertion of a survey. We do like to get your feedback on what works, what you want going forward, because that helps us to make sure that we support the communities of practice to design and run events that are meaningful for the people that they're trying to support. So if you see that, please do spend a small minute to provide that feedback. But again, thank you everybody for being part of this, and it has been very, very rich and valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm not sure if Monica wants to have a quick thank you to everyone.
No, not at all. I've really enjoyed the session. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to you, Charmaine, for holding such a space and for asking such great questions. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful Africa Day, and we'll look forward to see you in person, hopefully next time. So have yourself a wonderful day. See ya.